Hello and welcome to this nudgecast episode 8. My name is Tim Perkins. I'm founder of Nudge and I'm joined by my co-founder Jeremy Beament. We're here to talk about coronavirus and how this has brought a generational paradox. Firstly, talking about generational paradoxes, Jeremy, how's your first day after Easter homeschooling? It's not easy, is it?
I'd rather not talk about it, if I'm honest. So my wife's taken our three out for half an hour so we can do this recording, and it's going to be the best half an hour of the day.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I have to agree with that. So, I mean, the situation's obviously pretty grim, both from a health perspective, but also from an economic and personal finance perspective. Most countries, including the UK, now confirm that they are set to enter recession. So what's clear is that the health crisis has become a financial crisis. So I think just looking back over the latest stats, so from a health perspective, deaths in England and Wales have hit a 20-year high. So I read that today. 16,500 deaths purely from coronavirus, and there's a lot of talk about actually how the numbers are a lot more. Meanwhile, from a personal finance perspective, 4 in 10 people affected, saying that their wages have decreased by 50% or more. 2 million people already lost their jobs, and it's anticipated that 9 million in total are expected to be furloughed. So I think one of the startling observations in all of this is that whilst the virus itself is most likely to affect the older population, those the most financially impacted are and will continue to be the younger generation. So Jed, what's your take on that? I know you've done some thinking into this.
Yeah, so you're quite right. So younger people are and will continue to be more financially impacted, and there are a number of different reasons for that. So there are some obvious reasons. So for example, younger people are significantly more likely to work in the hospitality and retail sectors, which have been immediately impacted. There'll also be the generation of recent and upcoming education leavers who'll be entering into the job market probably the worst time in living memory. Going deeper though, there's also the generation before to consider, those people who've been coming into work since 2008. Because although it's more pronounced in places like Spain and Italy, for example, in the UK, you're also still much more likely to have already been unemployed even before coronavirus if you're young. So 9.4% unemployment versus 3.6% unemployment for older people. And that disparity will become more pronounced. Also, it's worth mentioning that as a consequence of that, a key consideration here is that the longer people are outside of the workplace or not employed in careers of their choosing or that are meaningful for them, that creates an enormous range of long-term societal issues that we all need to be very concerned about. Now, you and I were both born in 1978, so we're slap bang in the middle of these two groups, and it does give us a real perspective, doesn't it? That we've got obvious concern for the health of our parents and older colleagues and peers, but also feeling the financial pain to come off that younger generation.
Yeah, and just hearing you speak there, thinking that through, as you're aware, we have the buddying system at Nudge to try and kind of help people feel less isolated during this difficult time. And I was buddy with one of our colleagues last week, who's probably the youngest member of the Nudge team. And it was quite striking when I was chatting to him. He explained that without exception, all of his mates have been either furloughed or made redundant, which I thought was quite significant and really struck me. And his view was that, well, we were the last in, so we're the first out, which I thought was significant. But what really, I guess, struck me was just how accepting he was of that. Which I guess younger people have come used to just getting a rough deal with all of this stuff, and I heard that loud and clear, with somebody very close to my world. Yeah. So what's your view, George?
Yeah. So I think there's no wonder that they're feeling like that. So I think it's quite well known that there was that golden generation, so those baby boomers and early Gen X, so people basically born between 1945 and 1970, and particularly in Europe, that they've really had it good, haven't they? So there was a mixture of peace, affordable housing, gilt-edge pension provision, generous state provision. And when you compare that on practically every measure, younger people today are less likely to be able to afford housing, own their own home, or indeed own any assets whatsoever. One of the kind of interesting things that happened after 2008 and will happen again is that the government policy response, so things like quantitative easing, for example, what they do is boost asset prices, and the people who already own assets, who are mostly older people, are those that gain most. And this puts housing, for example, even more out of reach for younger people, who therefore need to rent, which again are a group who are not particularly catered for in the government response to the current pandemic. I think as a separate point, your pay is really all about the compound growth through your career. So for example, if you have two people who go through their career, they start at exactly the same salary, but one gets 2% pay rise each year, another one gets 5% pay rise each year. After 10 years, there's already a pay difference of 30% between them. So those working for the last 12 years have experienced the worst pay increases since Napoleonic times. So it's pretty much no wonder that they're accepting of their lot at the moment, because that's all they've been used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, isn't it? And I just trying to think through there, what government can do. And hearing you talk about compound interest, here you're talking about pensions, occurs to me, there has been some debate about the state pension, and in particular triple lock. So, that mechanism that protects a certain level of inflation in payment. And I read something along the lines of, just by adjusting that triple lock would save £4 billion, which could obviously go a long way right now. What's your view though? Does something like that look justifiable? Is there any more that government can do?
So the government are going to end up with a massive bill as a consequence of this. There's absolutely no doubt. So what is it, 50 billion and counting? And they're going to have to do something. So you mentioned triple lock, where people, in the same time that normal workers or people on salaries have had a 7% increase in their pay, the triple lock has meant that state pensions gone up 20%, and that doesn't really look justifiable. It seems likely that over the coming years the NHS will be protected and enhanced for years to come, and quite rightly so. And I would say that depending on the severity of the recession, everything else might be up for grabs. So things like corporation tax and VAT, they're rarely a vote loser, are they, if they're increased? But that does put more pressure on companies, which will likely depress wage growth for longer, so exacerbates that problem we were talking about earlier on. Complex taxes, such as pension tax relief, could be up for review, or actually maybe income tax for the better off to pay back the NHS. That would be hard to argue with. But what is certain, whatever happens, is that the tax code in the UK, which is already the world's most complex, will become more so. I'm not seeing much respite for younger people, though. The government are going to be so indebted, they don't really have a lot of wriggle room.
No, and you talked about a couple of bits there that I guess are employer focused. So tax code, for example, wage growth. What, particularly while we're in this kind of immediate crisis mode, what do you think HR and reward teams can do to try and help the pain in any way at all?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? That it's such a big problem. It's almost an overwhelming problem. But I would say that the counterbalance of that is that organisations having young, engaged people can be really significant, particularly as we exit this crisis. One of the things that I think we're going to see is a fast forwarding of the adoption of new technologies and flexible ways of working, and young, dynamic people have a significant part to play in that. So we've thought through some practical ways that HR can support both short-term ideas, but also longer-term ideas that are going to take several years to implement. So I think HR people really have to grab the mantle here and think about short-term tactical changes, but also really long-term ways that they can help support the younger workforce.
Okay, so what have you got up your sleeve?
Okay.
Any short-term tips?
Okay, so I think definitely a time for innovative scheme design, particularly that's driven by real data insights. I think everything that we can be doing to upskill and increase the confidence and knowledge of people, of their how they approach and deal with their money. I should say these ideas are all through the lens of financial well-being, making sure through great communication that young people don't, at this critical moment, opt out of auto enrollment because they're unlikely then to join again until it's too late. And also remembering that young people in particular, because of their desire to socialize and network ideas and ways of doing things, that actually a lot of what you can be doing, particularly around things like financial education, is not just aimed at the employee, but also giving their wider network access to those things as well. Could be a really great way of helping to build your corporate social responsibility agenda and helping your young people in ways that they really respect and admire.
Yeah, and just hearing you talk there about the scheme design at the beginning took me back to my benefit consulting days, many years ago. And I heard recently about one of the insurance companies in Singapore, I think it is, has introduced a specialist insurance policy just purely to pay out upon diagnosis of CV-19, and it's been absolutely flying off the shelves. So I think that for too long, too many benefit schemes just stay the same as they were every year and don't necessarily change with the times. But this provides a real trigger for people to review what they're offering. So things like payroll loans. Majority of payroll loans are taken out to buy new stuff rather than debt consolidation. Should there actually the focus on those types of products be more around saving? We knew that people weren't equipped to deal with a financial shock. And what this episode has shown is that absolutely was true. People weren't equipped. So maybe some education and savings products that can help people build that resilience going forward. That might be a good central point of a benefit program.
And I remember when you and I first came into the industry nearly 20 years ago, and one of our mentors said that the typical benefit program is aimed at the middle-aged white male, and I think that is largely true. So, for example, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, yeah, we're considering changing it so that any excess pension contributions over and above auto enrollment minimum, we're thinking of allowing employees to redirect that to things like a LISA that can help them get on the housing ladder, or to pay off their student loan." And no one's really done it, only a handful of companies. Now's the time to come up and actually push through those innovative ideas. They're the things that are going to move the dial and make a difference.
Although I would say that particular example is quite dangerous. So, not necessarily now because the markets have rallied, but a week or so ago, when the stock markets were as low as they were, that's the time to be continuing to invest in your pension. So I think whatever you do, you need to make sure that people are equipped to make the right decision, make informed decisions. And independent financial education, I'm bound to say it, aren't I? But obviously that has a role to play in making sure that people are making those right decisions. What about longer term, Jed? So from an HR perspective, longer term, what do you think?
Yeah, so these are longer term initiatives, but I do think you need to have a long-term lens on these things. So workforce planning is a big area. So one of our clients, Siemens, have really led the field in this. So basically they had this This is a case study of ours that they had this problem that they could see the slow motion car crash happening in the future where their people were not going to be able to afford to retire when they and the company expected them to. And that was going to create all kinds of talent pipeline blockage and other issues. So as a part of Project Pearl, it was all about engaging people with their pension plans and getting them to contribute more. And as a consequence of the work we did with them, their employees are now contributing an extra £7 million a year into their plans, which means that the vast majority of them are now on track for the retirement that they want. And that's going to unblock all of those kind of talent issues, allow older people to retire when they want to, and make sure that there's room for those younger people to come into the workforce and thrive. A couple of other ideas. So these are more around the kind of business case of financial education in particular, that although there are massive benefits for the employees of implementing these programs, there are also benefits to the company that implement them and also the end customers of the company that implement them. So quite a few of our clients have actually implemented Nudge not only to help the employee, but also to build financial literacy and upskill the employees so that as a consequence, for example, if they work in an insurance company, they can give better end care to their customers, which then drives profit or actually drives commercial awareness amongst the workforce so that employees really value every pound they spend like it's a pound, their own pound, and as a consequence, again, drive profit. So there's some really more innovative, longer term approaches to financial well-being that can help your organization be more attractive to younger people, help them thrive, and also create the room to allow younger people into the workforce and be promoted and so forth.
Yeah, and since 2008, we've heard increasing calls for the universal income. So this is the idea that everybody gets an income from the state, regardless of whether you're working or not. And interestingly, in the last month, Pope Francis, Mark Zuckerberg, and the Vice President of the European Central Bank have all raised it into the debate again. So what about from a pay perspective, Jed? Anything, any idea of how this might manifest itself there?
Yeah, there has been already a growing movement, and I think it's going to really grow and accelerate that actually customers want to buy from companies who get it, who have a social conscience. And I think that the kind of the combination of executive remuneration that's just been kind of getting out of control. So, for example, there's a statistic that CEO remuneration as a multiple of average worker's salary has grown by 940% since 1978. And then when you combine that with that new respect that we all have for lower paid frontline workers, be they in the NHS or in our supermarkets and so forth, those two kind of colliding, I think that there's going to be an inevitability. Oh, and by the way, I should point out that younger people are much more likely to take those frontline positions, that kind of collision is going to mean that there's going to be more and more pressure on executive pay, which will likely reduce, and that there'll be this also overwhelming desire to implement a universal income or fairer pay for younger frontline people. So I personally sincerely hope that happens.
Okay, brilliant. Well, fascinating hearing your views. I think there's some good tips and tricks in there as well, Jed. The problem's enormous, but at least there are some bits that can be done. So thanks for sharing those ideas with us, and look forward to speaking to you next week.
Cheers, Tim.